So there's an interesting new poll on the media from Pew Research. I wanted to share this with you. Majorities of both parties expect their news to be accurate, but few Republicans think the news media will admit mistakes. Okay, so you can see the numbers there. Expect that the national news stories they get will be largely accurate. Republicans says 62% of them expect that. 86% of Democrats expect that the national news stories they get are going to be accurate. But then look at this. News organizations will admit to their mistakes. Only 12% of Republicans say that they'll admit to their mistakes, and only 48% of Democrats say that they'll admit to their mistakes. So in other words, people are saying, yeah, I guess by most of the stuff the media is going to talk about is probably true. But then they go on to say, if they do fuck up, they're not going to admit that. They're just going to leave it out there. I think they're mostly right. I think the people are mostly right about that. In my experience, and obviously I'm fucking buried in the news 24/7. In my experience, yes. As much as I beat up on CNN and mainstream media and stuff like that, I think it is fair to say that most of the stuff that they talk about is factually accurate. Now, most of that stuff is barely noteworthy, though. And it's like not like, oh, you know, hey, this fucking random thing happened with this celebrity. Okay. This bill is being debated right now in Congress. Okay. So, in other words, their focus is not necessarily on the right things. And it's boring. And it's tedious. But I think most of the stuff they talk about is true. But then there's a lot of stuff that's not true. You know, and unfortunately, it happens to be big things. Like, you know, when they were all pushing for the war in Iraq, for example. So, but I generally agree with the sentiment of the people here, where they're like, yeah, I guess most of it's true, but if they fuck up, it's not, you know, they fuck up and they don't correct it. I've seen that many times, where they fuck up and they don't correct it. And then I will add one thing on top of it, which is, there are so many high-profile instances where on big questions, they just shut their brains off and go right along with what the establishment wants. So I have to add that as a caveat to what they're saying, because they're saying, oh, it's mostly correct what they talk about. Yeah, it's mostly correct. But then a lot of the stuff, it's not. And when it's not, boy, are they wrong about the big questions. Okay. And then, here's the most important point. More Americans feel disconnected from the news media than feel connected. Percentage of U.S. adults who say news organizations understand people like them. 40% do not understand people like them. 58% feel connected. 42% do not feel particularly connected. 56%. So, you know what that tells me? You know what those numbers mean? Here's my interpretation of that. And you can feel free to disagree with it, but I think it's a pretty straightforward interpretation. This is the American people saying mainstream media is elitist. That's what that means. Oh, are they connected to people like me? Do they understand people like me? Only 40% say yes. 58% say no, they don't understand people like me. Yeah, that means that they think, oh, like, ooh, the media is all like fucking yuppie and they think they're special and they look down on you. That's elitism. That's what that is. Again, I think that this poll I think that's true. I think it's true. I think the mainstream media is mostly elitist. They're mostly pro-establishment. I think it's painfully obvious in so many circumstances, whether it's Jake Tapper fact-checking Medicare for All when it wasn't even a fact-check and he was dead wrong and he misinterpreted what Bernie said, and, you know, Wolf Blitzer arguing with Rand Paul and saying, well, what about the profits of defense contractors when it came to not arming Saudi Arabia, who's doing a slaughter fest in Yemen? Yeah, they're elitist. That's what they are. They're pro-establishment, they're elitist, and the American people know it. So I think these are interesting numbers about the media. I think the American people are mostly correct, and that's why, come at me, bitch, new media, baby. Come watch Secular Talk. Patreon.com/Secular Talk. Love you guys. Appreciate your support.